President Trump proposes a major change to immigration policy, eliminating birthright citizenship, but gets immediate pushback from the House Speaker and others. The President and the First Lady traveling to the site of Saturday's synagogue massacre to pay respects today. And how realistic is the idea of Hillary Clinton running for president again in 2020? This is Special Report. Good evening, I'm Bret Baier. We're coming to you tonight live from the White House. The President and the First Lady will be back here soon after a trip to Pittsburgh, where 11 people were killed Saturday at that Jewish synagogue. Meantime, President Trump is indicating, as you look at the West Wing, he's just a stroke of a pen away from changing birthright citizenship, making any child born in this country a U.S. citizen, even if the parents are not. The President says he can do it through executive order. Many others, including the House Speaker, say he cannot, and that it would require a constitutional amendment. Chief White House correspondent John Roberts joins me here on the North Lawn with the latest. Good to be back. Hey,
Brett, good to see you here. And we'll see where this is going to go. Normally, the process to amend the Constitution requires a two-thirds majority vote in the House and the Senate, followed by ratification of 3/4 of the United States. But President Trump believes there may be a way to do that with a simple signature.
It's in the process. It'll happen with an executive order.
For 150 years, the 14th Amendment to the Constitution has conferred citizenship to children born on U.S. soil. But with 3 migrant caravans setting their sights on the United States southern border, President Trump would like to change that.
It was always told to me that you needed a constitutional amendment.
Right.
Guess what?
Amendment.
You don't.
The 14th Amendment states all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States. But the White House is zeroing in on the 5 words subject to the jurisdiction thereof to possibly make a case that people who cross the border illegally may not be eligible for constitutional protections.
The Supreme Court of the United States has never ruled on whether or not the language of the 14th Amendment, subject to the jurisdiction thereof, applies specifically to people who are in the country illegally. And I think the President's looking at executive action. I know the Congress has looked at legislative action to reconsider that.
The issue of birthright citizenship came up early in the 2016 campaign. Donald Trump and Jeb Bush both highlighting the problem of what they called anchor babies and taking sharp criticism for it.
If there's another term that I could come up with, I'm happy to hear it.
Now, a week before the midterms, President Trump has picked up that torch again.
We're the only country in the world where a person comes in, has a baby, and the baby is essentially a citizen of the United States for 85 years with all of those benefits. It's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. And it has to end.
The United States is not the only country to confer birthright citizenship. More than 30 others, including Canada, also do. But some countries, like the UK and Australia, have rescinded birthright citizenship laws. While President Trump would like to end it with an executive order, leaders from his own party say the only way to do it is through a constitutional amendment.
Well, you obviously cannot do that. You cannot end birthright citizenship with an executive order.
Democrats accuse the president of manufacturing an issue in the final hours to deflect from what voters really care about, health care. In a statement, House Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi saying the president does not have the power to erase parts of the Constitution. Clearly, Republicans will do absolutely anything to divert attention away from their votes to take away Americans' health care. Republican Senator Lindsey Graham seemed to agree it would take a constitutional amendment and said he'd introduce legislation to do it. But on principle, he was in lockstep with the president, in a statement saying, finally, a president willing to take on this absurd policy of birthright citizenship. This policy is a magnet for illegal immigration out of the mainstream of the developed world and needs to come to an end. The urgency to do something to stop the caravan that's headed for the southern border appears to be increasing. At an impromptu press conference this afternoon, General Terrence O'Shaughnessy, who is the head of the U.S. Northern Command, said, quote, "This caravan is different than what we've seen in the past. What we have seen is clearly an organization at a higher level than we have seen before. We've seen violence coming out of the caravan, and we have seen as they pass other international borders, we've seen them behave in a nature that we have not seen in the past." So clearly this administration, if they can't do something to stop them, they want to make sure that people know that they're not welcome here in the United States.
So 7 days until the midterms. The president's bouncing all over the place. Every indication he's going to be talking a lot about immigration from now until next Tuesday.
It's not the top issue on a lot of voters' minds. Health care is the top issue on many voters' minds, but the president's still trying to keep immigration up there. He knows that it fuels the base, and he thinks he can get people out to the polls on it.
All right, John, thank you. The caravans, as John mentioned, are getting closer, but still a long way from the U.S. southern border. The biggest caravan is actually getting smaller, according to people traveling alongside. But the president is still ordering the Pentagon to deploy more than 5,000 additional military personnel to the southern border. National correspondent William Lajeunesse is traveling with that larger group in Mexico.
I want to go to the United States because I want a better opportunity to work, you know.
47-year-old Elvis Romero remains undeterred, despite President Trump's promise to close the border.
I want asking for asylum policy, you know. I want asking for the United States, Mr. President Trump, give me the opportunity to stay there, you know, because I want to give a better life for me.
Mexico offered the migrants work permits, housing, medical care, and schooling. So far, fewer than 150 accepted.
Not much working in Mexico. No, not much money.
Organizers want 150 buses to transport the caravan from Oaxaca to Mexico City along narrow, winding roads and blind curves for the safety of migrants and motorists alike. Some may take the train, others join, but the group, ranging from 4,000 to 5,000, grinds north.
The Guatemalan soldiers blocked it. They still went through. Then it happened in Mexico. Soldiers, and now they're passed, and they didn't force themselves through. Somehow they've passed.
As for the president's effort to secure the border, organizer Luis Cruz believes U.S. law and public opinion are on their side.
It's the same thing they told us the last caravan we took up there, and if you can see, most of the people that we took up, most of the families are at the United States with a refugee.
But clearly, in the last 48 hours, President Trump has changed the rules of the game to stop the surge of Central American families seeking asylum in the U.S. that we've seen since 2014, Brett. At this point in time, I would say that it's about half the apprehensions right now at the Border Patrol, and I don't think the American dream that these people are thinking about is going to end the way they wanted. Brett?
William Lajeunesse, live, traveling with that bigger caravan. William, thanks. President Trump went to Pittsburgh with the First Lady this afternoon, visiting the site where 11 people were killed Saturday in that shooting at a Jewish synagogue. He was not welcomed by all there. Correspondent Garrett Tenney in Pittsburgh looks at the politics of consoling the mourning. Good evening, Garrett.
Brett, good evening to you. Today, the president took on the role of consoler-in-chief, and as he visited the Pittsburgh area 3 days after the worst anti-Semitic attack in U.S. history, he was joined by the First Lady, along with daughter Ivanka and son-in-law Jared Kushner, who are practicing Jews, and they joined the president to express support for Pittsburgh's Jewish community on behalf of the entire nation. The president first visited the Tree of Life Synagogue, laying stones from the White House and white roses at each of the Stars of David for the 11 victims. He then went to UPMC Hospital to visit the 4 police officers who were injured responding to the attack and the medical team that's treated them and 2 other victims. Not everyone in the Steel City is happy about the president's visit, though. The president's arrival was met with protest, and the city's mayor did not meet with the president, saying he wanted to focus on helping his city recover. A group of progressive rabbis said the president's divisive rhetoric about minorities is partly to blame for the attack, but other Jewish leaders say the president's visit is welcome.
He doesn't serve to help our community, or as I see it, any community other than white nationalists. And white nationalism is really at the root of the problem here.
He is our president, and if he chooses to come here to be with us, I would hope as Rabbi Myers that he would be willing to engage in a conversation.
Funerals for the 11 worshipers began today. Thousands lined up outside Pittsburgh's largest and oldest synagogue, Rodef Shalom Temple, for the services for the Rosenthal brothers, Cecil and David. Similar crowds also attended services for Jerry Wabinowitz and Daniel Stein. Funerals for the other 7 victims are scheduled to take place over the next few days, and the man who is charged with their deaths will now likely face the death penalty. Brett?
Garrett Tenney, live in Pittsburgh. Garrett, thanks. Let's talk more about the president's trip and the other news of the day. Kellyanne Conway, as counselor to the president, joins us here on the North Lawn. Kellyanne, thanks for coming out.
Thank you, Brett.
First, on the president's trip, why did he feel compelled to go? Obviously, the mayor of Pittsburgh expressed his thoughts. Others said he's the president, he should go. Why did the president want to go?
The president never hesitated. He wanted to be there with the Tree of Life community to express his condolences along with the First Lady, his daughter and son-in-law. And with the president's remarks on Saturday were very strong against anti-Semitism, and that's the lesson I really want my 4 Catholic children and the whole world to know, is that these 11 innocents were murdered because they were Jewish. That man went in there allegedly saying all Jews must die and that he was bent on murdering them, and he got his way with 11 of them. I want their stories to be remembered. I want their names to not be forgotten. I've been trying to read them and also just to have the instructiveness of anti-Semitism and its prevalence around the world, and then unfortunately here in Pittsburgh. I think it's unfortunate people were out there politically protesting with different messages today. That is their First Amendment right, but this president was not about politics today. He was about the mourning in Pittsburgh.
Do you expect the president to speak out more about this against, white nationalism or anti-Semitism? Do you expect him to give a speech or something?
Well, he's been doing that, though, all along. People should read his tweets. They should listen to him on Saturday when he gave those remarks, very heartfelt remarks. Those of us who have discussed this particular tragedy, act of evil, vile hatred, anti-Semitic hatred with him, know that where his heart is, and he's tried to express that to the country. People who want to find negative will always find it, but I think many people looked up today, within the last hour, Brett, saw President and First Lady truly moved by what they see in the loss, the senseless loss, and the act of evil there. This president has shown up in Las Vegas, in Parkland, Florida. He's been there for natural disasters that have struck different states and the territories, and so for him, this is more of a natural place for him to be than people give him credit for.
All right. The other issue today is that he told Axios that he wants to possibly sign an executive order to change birthright citizenship. Here is House Speaker Paul Ryan on this issue.
Obviously cannot do that. You cannot end birthright citizenship with an executive order. We didn't like it when Obama tried changing immigration laws via executive action, and obviously as conservatives, we believe in the Constitution.
As conservatives, we believe in the Constitution. So how do you respond to that?
Well, as do we. We didn't like it when the Congress failed to act on immigration for, many years now, including this last year. Do you know it's been over a year, Brett, since the president presented his 70-point immigration plan to the United States Congress. They never acted on it. Then he boiled it down to 4 points. Take care of the Dreamers, DACA, build the wall, end the visa lottery, and then end the chain migration. 4 very simple concepts, all of which poll very well, by the way, with large swaths of Americans, not just the base. And yet, Congress never acted. Now, on the matter of birthright citizenship, 30 countries do have it, but only 2 in the, quote, developed world as the IMF defines that, Canada and the U.S. Europe doesn't have that. France ended theirs in 1993. And most parts of Asia, many parts of Asia don't have it. So many other constitutional scholars have said that the 14th Amendment has been misinterpreted or misused in this way. There's no question that there have been news reports about, for some, birth tourism, where women pay a lot of money, maybe money that they really don't have, to make sure that their children are born here. So the idea that this isn't happening, the idea that it isn't going on in the thousands, the idea that it's not unique to the U.S. and to Canada and the developed world is just false.
So what do you say to the people who look at this and we're 1 week from Election Day and say, come on, this is just about turning the page, stirring the pot, getting people fired up?
Well, the president's out there, as you know. He's in Pittsburgh today to express his condolences for this vile anti-Semitic act, but he also, on all the other days, he's out there campaigning for candidates who he says will help support his agenda. And what does he talk about out in the stump? Many things. He talks about a free market health care. He talks about the tax cuts. He talks about deregulation. He talks about the fact that he has tried to meet with Kim Jong-un to get denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula, which helps everyone, and that the remains of those fallen in Korea are now back on American soil, being respected and buried by their families finally. We have detainees and hostages that are coming back home. And he talks about immigration, but he talks about immigration in many ways. He talks about border security as national security. He talks about coming to this country legally or through a legal port of entry. There are 26 of them. Do you know, just last year we had 38,000, we processed 38,000 claims of credible fear. That's a record. DHS said over 500,000 people tried to cross over illegally last year. We have an uptick in the number of children being smuggled. We have an uptick in the number of assaults that are happening. That's not everybody. That's not most people. But why are we turning a blind eye? Why are all those Democrats silent? They all signed on to the Feinstein plan that basically just looks the other way. Border security is national security, and this president has talked about it for many years. It helped him get elected.
One of the tweets during the pipe bomb mailings that the president sent out was that it was turning the page, that it was essentially slowing the momentum of Republicans at that moment. Is that what he's seeing now? Is that the momentum was slowed?
Well, the president sends many tweets on many different topics, so I think we need to take the totality of the tweets and the totality of his presidency. While he was sending, or about the time he was sending that tweet within a day or so, he also had an unbelievable event here in the East Room with Black Americans, and they came from all across the country to say that we are not all Democrats. We support the president's agenda, and he's welcomed us into the people's home, into his home, in the residence, and that got very little coverage, and the coverage it got was them being demeaned and derided by others, and he's sticking up for them as well. So this president does not see the momentum slow down insofar as he's out there running through the tape, leaving it all in the field like he did in 2016. He will have done a record number of presidential visits between Labor Day and Election Day for any sitting president. President Obama was active, President George W. Bush was active, but this president will have had more events than they did.
Kellyanne, we appreciate your time.
Thank you, Brett.
Up next, a ballot initiative in Colorado could mean a big change for fracking there. Opponents say it could mean big job losses. We'll take you there. First, what some of our Fox affiliates around the country are covering tonight. Fox 11 in Charleston, West Virginia, with the mysterious death of notorious Boston gangster and FBI informant James Whitey Bulger. He was found unresponsive this morning at the federal penitentiary in West Virginia, where he had just been transferred. A prison union official says the death is being investigated as a homicide. Multiple reports now cite sources saying Bulger had been beaten to death. He was captured in 2011 after 16 years on the run. Fox 59 in Indianapolis has a 9-year-old girl and her twin 6-year-old brothers were struck and killed by a pickup truck as they crossed the road to board a school bus before sunrise this morning. Fourth child there badly hurt, airlifted to a hospital. The driver stayed at the scene. Police say it's too early to tell if that person was speeding. And this is a live look at New York from Fox 5, our affiliate there. The big story there tonight, a federal judge keeping the trial of notorious Mexican drug lord Joaquin El Chapo Guzman on schedule to begin next month. The judge denying a defense request today to delay that trial so it could have more time to review evidence. The judge saying jury selection will take place next week as planned. He says the jurors will hear opening statements November 13th. That is tonight's live look outside the Beltway from Special Report. We'll be right back to the White House after this. Welcome back to a gorgeous fall night here at the White House. 5 members of the Afghan Taliban who were freed from the U.S. military prison at Guantanamo Bay in exchange for captured American Army Sergeant Bo Bergdahl have joined the insurgents group's political office in Qatar. That is according to a Taliban spokesman. They will now be among Taliban representatives negotiating for peace, they say, in Afghanistan. Some negotiators say this indicates the Taliban's desire for a peace pact. Others fear the 5 will bring them the hardline views that will obviously make peace more difficult. An Interior Department Inspector General's report here in Washington says a federal employee infected a government network with malware after viewing almost 10,000 pornographic web pages at work. 10,000. The report says the employee at the U.S. Geological Survey saved many of the images to an unauthorized USB device and a personal cell phone. Nextgov.com reports the employee no longer works for that agency. The Justice and Interior Departments are refusing to comment on reports that Interior Inspector General is referring one of its ongoing probes into Secretary Ryan Zinke to the Justice Department. The Washington Post citing 2 individuals familiar with the matter. Zinke is said to be the subject of 3 separate Inspector General investigations, not known which one is being referred to the Justice Department for further investigation. Zinke's attorney told Fox News today the Secretary has not been contacted about any Justice Department investigation and has done nothing wrong. In America's election headquarters tonight, a ballot initiative in Colorado that could fundamentally change one of the largest industries there. Correspondent Alicia Acuna in Greeley, Colorado, tonight on a measure to severely limit fracking.
In Colorado, one of the nation's top energy-producing states, a battle is underway between backers of Proposition 112 who want to change the law to require all new well sites for fracking be at least 2,500 feet from areas considered vulnerable, like schools, homes, and water sources.
So there's solid science that backs up this distance. It's not arbitrary.
Backers of the measure, Colorado Rising, says folks who live near fracking wells fear dangers like chemical exposure and accuse the industry of putting profits over people.
They don't take into account people's health, whether it's children or families. And so we feel that it's our responsibility as responsible Coloradans to make sure that if industrial activity is going to happen, that it's not on top of homes.
Current law requires well distance be set at 500 feet. If passed, the initiative would quadruple the setback, placing massive amounts of land off limits.
So in the first year alone, we're going to see about 43,000 jobs lost.
A majority of those jobs not from oil and gas, but other community sectors like retail, hotels, and real estate, according to the opposition, which also challenges the notion the process is unsafe.
We have the strictest environmental and health regulations of anywhere in the country, and our companies have to abide by them. They're law.
The list of opponents is long, powerful, and well-funded. Colorado Democratic Governor John Hickenlooper and both nominees running to replace him, plus Republican John Elway and even the Denver Post editorial board, which writes the way this initiative is written, it would effectively ban oil and gas operations in a state with rich reserves waiting to be developed.
The oil and gas industry has spent about $40 million fighting this initiative. That's in comparison to the just $1 million by supporters. Bret?
Alicia Acuna in Colorado. Alicia, thank you. Up next, a fierce battle in Utah for the only African-American female Republican in Congress. She's trying to hang on to her job. We'll bring you there. First, beyond our borders tonight, the Turkish fiancé of slain journalist Jamal Khashoggi is calling on President Trump and other leaders to ensure his death in Istanbul is not covered up. Hatice Cengiz said at a memorial in London Monday she is disappointed with many world leaders. Heavy rains and high winds buffeting much of Italy have killed 10 people over the last 2 days. Officials there say many of the deaths were due to falling trees, crashing down on cars or on passersby. One woman was buried by mud when a landslide invaded her home. Indonesia's National Transportation Safety Committee says experts from Boeing will arrive Wednesday to help with the investigation of Monday's crash. The 2-month-old Boeing 737 MAX 8 plane went into the sea northeast of Jakarta just minutes after takeoff. All 189 people on board were killed. Just some of the other stories beyond our borders tonight. We'll be right back to the White House. We go back out on the campaign trail now. Tonight's destination, the state of Utah, one of the reddest in the country. But the Republican incumbent with a one-of-a-kind resume is in a close and nasty fight to try to retain her House seat in the Salt Lake City suburbs. Here's correspondent Peter Ducey.
The only black Republican woman in Congress is locked in one of the tightest re-election fights in the country.
This one's particularly close right now because of all of the lies that have been put out there by Democrats.
Congresswoman Mia Love and her challenger, Salt Lake County Mayor Ben McAdams, are tied 45 points apiece in a New York Times poll, and the closing days have been dominated by negative ads and accusations of dirty fundraising.
The FEC has informed her that she raised almost $1 million illegally. She's coming back and saying it wasn't $1 million, it was only $400,000. The reality is she broke the law.
The Congresswoman counters that she's been cleared.
The FEC actually said she's fine, completely actually sent a written statement saying that we've done nothing wrong.
Love says during her campaign for a third term, constituents have complimented her support of efforts to free Utah resident Joshua Holt from a Venezuelan prison.
Bringing Joshua home and working with the State Department was a big issue.
She also says voters express a desire for permanent tax cuts and immigration reform.
They want those things to be done, not by executive order, legislator, but by the United States Congress.
McAdams says the top issue here is health care.
What we've talked about is my track record at the local level and what I plan to do to represent Utahns.
And if he wins, he'd push for a major change.
I have said that I'm not voting for Nancy Pelosi for Speaker, and I'm looking for new leadership.
The Democrat is also trying to establish himself as the only one interested in bipartisan legislation.
I think people have seen Congresswoman Love. She votes the party line 95.7% of the time.
Love says her record in Congress can be calculated differently.
That same website that he gets that from, we vote with Democrats 70% of the time. So again, it's absolutely baloney.
Because of redistricting, this is only the fourth ever election in Utah's 4th district. And the fact that Democrat stands such a good chance to win means there might be a lot of split tickets here because the Republican running for Senate at the top of the ticket has a commanding lead. That's Mitt Romney. Brett?
Peter Ducey live in Salt Lake City. Peter, thank you. Hillary Clinton says she really doesn't want to run for president again. But Hillary Clinton also says she would like to be president and is very qualified and will make a decision after the midterms. Those comments have obviously reignited talk of a possible 2020 rematch between President Trump and the woman he defeated 2 years ago. Here's senior political correspondent Mike Emanuel.
Hello, how are you? Hillary Clinton has said she's not planning to run for president again in 2020, but sent mixed signals during an event Friday.
Well, I'd like to be president. Look, I think, hopefully, when we have a Democrat in the Oval Office in January of 2021, there's going to be so much work to be done.
Clinton was also quick to rehash her qualifications for the job.
So the work would be work that I feel very well prepared for, having been in the Senate for 8 years, having been a diplomat in the State Department, and it's just going to be a lot of heavy lifting.
Her longtime advisors don't want to talk about another White House run. Philippe Reines told the Hill newspaper she's more likely to win Powerball. Another Clinton ally believed to be considering a White House run of his own quickly poured cold water on the speculation as well.
I feel very confident in saying I think Hillary is never going to be on a ballot again. I think she's done running for elective office.
If she does run again, Clinton will have to avoid potential landmines that can drive a news cycle, like when a host has a case of mistaken identity with prominent African Americans, confusing New Jersey Senator Cory Booker with a former attorney general.
Well, that was Eric Holder.
Yeah, Eric Holder,
yeah.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, I know they all look alike.
No, they don't. Oh, well done.
Fox's Laura Ingraham asked President Trump about the possibility of a 2020 rematch with Clinton.
I'd be very happy with Hillary. I don't see anybody that I wouldn't enjoy running against. And, you know, that could happen, but I don't see it right now.
Spokesman Nick Merrill notes when Clinton was asked who she would support, she said she was not even going to think about it until we get through this November 6th election. After that, plenty of Democrats are likely to jump into the 2020 race. Brett?
Plenty. Mike, thanks. The wild October ride for the stock market continued, but this time it was positive news for everyone's 401ks. The Dow surging today, 432. The S&P 500 was up 41. The Nasdaq jumped 111. How can the U.S. expand American businesses into developing overseas markets? We will talk live with the man running point for the president at one of the only agencies making money for the U.S. government. That's next. Welcome back to the White House. The flag's at half-staff for the victims in Pittsburgh. President Trump is trying to help American businesses expand into developing markets overseas. Ray Washburn, President and CEO of the Overseas Private Investment Corporation, OPIC, is the man in charge of making this happen. Joins us tonight on the North Lawn. Thanks for coming out, Ray.
Good, thank you, Brett.
First of all, for people at home, what does OPIC do? It's one of the only agencies that makes money for the U.S. government.
Well, OPIC was set up in 1971 to be the U.S. government's way to help expanding emerging markets have access to capital. So when companies want to go to a market that's sub-Saharan Africa or South America, they can't access capital, we can go in and lend money.
So bipartisan support, you just got new powers, more money, more ability to do that.
Well, when we came into office, when the Trump administration came in, OPIC was slated to be eliminated. And we were able to go in and talk to the people through the administration up on the Hill and convince both sides of the House and the Senate that OPIC actually is soft diplomacy and something that is important to our national security. And the president came out in his national security strategy for the first time and said economic development in these emerging markets is a major cornerstone of that strategy.
So part of that is obviously China is bouncing around the world, dumping money, doing investments. Part of empowering you is, I guess, to counter China.
That's correct. Well, the Chinese, as everyone has read in the papers and seen on the news, are everywhere around the world putting money out. OPEC's active in 130 countries with 800 projects, but we can't compete with the Chinese dollar for dollar. This new legislation called the BUILD Act took us from $29 billion to $60 billion, returning a profit to the American taxpayer. And we're not going to go the Chinese dollar for dollar, but we can pick certain projects that are strategic to the U.S.
I mean, somebody's sitting at home, you turn in a profit, you turn a couple bucks, what are you doing?
Well, we made $260 million for the U.S. taxpayer last year. And the way we're able to do that is we arbitrage a very small interest rate on the loans that we're able to make, and that turns a profit for us.
So for companies that are trying to get into these developing markets, they go to you?
They go, it's Overseas Private Investment Corporation, and they're able to go in, and as I said, we've been doing business since 1971 with 800 projects, and we underwrite them much like a bank or investment bank, but we look at it through a lens different than a bank, because banks typically won't go into a dicey market in a lot of these emerging countries, and we're able to go in and actually get economic activity started.
So, I mean, it's a win-win, because those countries obviously want the companies to come in and be there.
That is correct, and both sides of the aisle now see that we're able to go in, do good for these countries, create thousands of jobs, but do it as a profit. So it's much like teaching someone to fish rather than just giving them a fish.
Bipartisan makes money. That seems like a no-brainer in Washington.
Well, it's worked, and we're very excited with the new powers we have, and we're actually getting renamed the United States Development Finance Corporation, which will more brand us as, the United States around the world.
Ray, we appreciate the time.
Great, thank you.
Thanks a lot. Next up, President Trump wants to get rid of birthright citizenship. We'll get reaction to that. Plus, look ahead to the election 7 days from now when we come back to the White House.
It was always told to me that you needed a constitutional amendment.
Right.
Guess
14th
what?
Amendment.
You don't. You can definitely do it with an act of Congress, but now they're saying I can do it just with an executive order. Now, how ridiculous! We're the only country in the world where a person comes in, has a baby, and the baby is essentially a citizen of the United States for 85 years with all of those benefits. It's ridiculous. It's ridiculous, and it has to end.
Obviously cannot do that. You cannot end birthright citizenship with an executive order. We didn't like it when Obama tried changing immigration laws via executive action, and obviously as conservatives, we believe in the Constitution.
The president wants to end birthright citizenship with an executive order. The Constitution, the 14th Amendment, actually to the Constitution, reads, all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. Now, according to Pew, children born to illegal immigrants in the U.S., you can look at the numbers here. Back in 2014, the latest, they had surveyed 275,000 children born to illegal immigrants in the U.S., thereby becoming U.S. citizens. What about this? We'll start here with our panel. Charles Hurt, opinion editor for the Washington Times, Amy Walter, national editor for the Cook Political Report, and John McCormick, senior writer at Weekly Standard. All right, John, thoughts?
The reaction you saw from a lot of Senate candidates today was silence. You didn't hear a lot of them wanting to jump out and talk about this because this is a controversial policy. People not quite sure how it plays out. As to the substance of it, there's an interesting legal debate about whether or not those words, as you mentioned, the subject to the jurisdiction thereof, whether those grant birthright citizenship to illegal immigrants or not. Obviously, Paul Ryan disagrees with that. Many other countries don't have birthright citizenship. The president is right. Australia ended it back in 1986, but they did so with an interesting twist, which was to say that anyone who was an illegal alien and was born here, that at the age of 10, if they lived here for 10 years, they would be a citizenship. So that would avoid this policy problem of having this sort of permanent stateless people without a country, an underclass, if you will, if you implement this policy, and people are born here and they have no country to call their own. So obviously this is a big legal question about whether or not you can do it, and a lot of interesting policy.
Yeah, I mean, Amy, let's not take the context out. I mean, we are 7 days from the midterm elections. Right. Obviously, Republicans, including the president, want to talk about immigration. And does this move that ball?
I don't know, the kinds of places where Republicans are either comfortable or would like to see the president come and do a rally or talk about immigration are in the kinds of states where Republicans are already doing pretty well. And those are typically in those Senate races, those very deep red Senate races. But in the House, where the battlegrounds are in these suburban swing districts, where the swing voters are independent women, I don't think this is an issue that is going to get a whole lot of traction or going to be that helpful for Republicans. I get that the president wants to be able to change the topic, right? He's president of the United States. He wants to move it onto areas where he is more comfortable, where Republicans get more energized. But what I've been hearing from a lot of Republicans in the last couple of days is what they're seeing is something of an erosion now. They're not feeling as confident in some of these House districts. And to buoy those, here's what an interesting point. The president's campaign came out with ads the other day, a national ad that focused on the economy and jobs and had a woman protagonist talking about how important it was not to go backwards on the economy. This is a message on birthright citizenship, goes the exact opposite way and is talking not to the voters that those ads wanted to talk to.
Yeah, and also the president's not in that ad as they were making that final closing pitch. One person, Charlie, who is behind this effort is Senator Lindsey Graham, who released a statement saying, finally a president willing to take on this absurd policy of birthright citizenship. This policy is a magnet for illegal immigration out of the mainstream of the developed world and needs to come to an end. In addition, I plan to introduce legislation among the same lines as the proposed executive order from President Trump. And as John pointed out in his piece, Jeb Bush was for this as well during the campaign.
Sure. Yeah, and I think that Lindsey Graham is exactly right. You know, kudos to the president for taking on an issue that matters a lot to a lot of voters, both Democrats and Republicans, that have and an issue that has been completely disregarded by the leaders of both parties. That's a tremendously good thing. Now, we can have a debate about whether or not whether it requires a constitutional amendment or legislative action to change it. What I think is absolutely certain is if he were to do it through executive order, you would wind up with court challenges. And when the court took it up, it would matter to the court whether this was an executive order or a legislative fix. And the legislative fix for something like this would be so much stronger in court than an executive order for exactly the reasons that Paul Ryan mentioned, which is, the ping pong back and forth. There will be a future Democrat president, and all they have to do is go and switch it back. So I think I like the idea of punting it to Congress and forcing Democrats and Republicans in Congress to deal with the issue that they have neglected for so long.
I wanted you all to weigh in before I ran the soundbite. We've talked about this issue before, many years before. Our late colleague Charles Krauthammer weighed in on birthright citizenship. Take a listen.
Talking about changing the birthright citizenship, which has been around for 150 years, is a sideshow for the real issue. It is a sideshow because it's a symptom. If you control the border, those numbers will dwindle. And second, the issue is not the baby itself. It's the laws, the statutes, which are changeable. They're not constitutional, that change one baby into an imported village because of the preferences that we give to families. That ought to be the issue. That ought to be what we are discussing, and that's what you can change. Or even assuming the repeal of the 14th Amendment is a winning issue. Are these issues that Republicans want to actually advance?
We miss him every day, especially during these tough times that the country's dealing with. Wanted to hear him tonight on that. I want to turn to the election. Let's take a look at our power rankings as Fox News has it. First, the Senate. We have the split 45 Democrats, 50 Republicans. This includes likely and leans. We have 5 toss-up races. It looks like at this moment that if this all holds, that Republicans pick up 2, maybe even 3 seats in the Senate. On the House side, different story. 191 to 171, 31 toss-ups in the House. We have it. Obviously, 218 is the magic number for control of the House of Representatives. We asked you all to pick a race. Amy, let me start with you. You picked a House race.
I did. I picked a House race. This is in northern Maine. This is Maine's 2nd congressional district. What I like about this is, one, it's on the East Coast, so we'll know early on where this thing is going. But it's also one of 12 districts that went for Obama in 2012, but went for Trump in 2016. These are the kind of districts I'm going to be spending a whole lot of time watching on election night. We know that the districts that went for Hillary Clinton in 2016, especially the suburban districts, continue to break for Democrats right now. But if Democrats are going to have a really good night on election night, or if Republicans are going to have a better night, Republicans need to hold on to these Obama-Trump districts in these more rural, and a lot of these are in upstate New York and rural areas around the country.
All right, guys, I got to roll. Lightning round here. You've got 2 Senate races. First Charlie, then John.
Yeah, so Bob Menendez running in New Jersey, a state that Donald Trump lost by 14 points because of his corruption trial. He's in deep water, and Democrats are having to spend millions of dollars there that they'd like to spend elsewhere. And it'll be interesting to see whether the dissatisfaction with Trump is enough to get him back into the Senate.
All right, John, quickly.
Nevada Senate, it's one of the 5 races where the margin is within 2 points. The only state with a Republican senator up that Hillary Clinton won in 2016. Democrats still have an outside shot of taking over the Senate, but if they're going to do it, they're going to have to win Nevada. Dean Heller up by 1.7 points in the Real Clear Politics average. Not a comfortable place for him to be. The union machine in Nevada does a great job of getting out the vote, and you've had a lot of Democrats overperform in Nevada in recent years.
All right, panel, thank you very much. 7 days to go. When we come back, pulling together in Pittsburgh. Finally tonight, Pittsburgh's sports teams stepping up after that shooting at the Tree of Life Synagogue. The Pittsburgh Penguins will wear these stronger than hate patches on their jerseys in tonight's game. Then the jersey auction will happen to raise money for the victims and their families. Members of the Pittsburgh Steelers attended the funeral for 2 brothers killed. They released this video yesterday in their honor.
We just want to offer our condolences and our prayers to the people of Tree of Life. Our hearts break. Our prayers go out to the people of Squirrel Hill.
Good to see. That's it for this special report. Fair, balanced, and still unafraid. Here's Martha in New York.